Not all critical criminologists share the same view of society and its control by the means of production. There are two other views, the instrumental theory and the structural theory. Under the instrumental theory, the view that criminal law and the criminal justice system are capitalist instruments for controlling the lower class, holding to the belief that those in authority wield the power to control society and keep the lower classes in check. Under this view, the poor are driven to crime because they are frustrated with the unattainable goals set as a result of a capitalist system, creating class conflict. When finally it becomes so unbearable, it may result in riot or unrest because the lower class is hostile toward a social order that they are not allowed to shape, and the benefits are unattainable. The criminologists who study this view consider it essential to demystify or reveal the true purpose of the law, revealing that the destructive intent of capitalists inspires criminology, showing how capitalist law preserves ruling the class and having power. The structural theory disagrees with the instrumental theories and the idea that the law in capitalism is always working for the rich and against the poor, because if that was so, we wouldn't have white-collar crimes. They would have never been created. Rather, under the structural theory, criminal law and the criminal justice system are a means of defending and preserving the capitalist system. It's designed to keep it operating efficiently, free from anyone, worker or owner. They don't want anybody rocking the boat. Keeps everyone from rocking the boat. And an example of this is we wouldn't have antitrust laws. Why do we have antitrust laws? It allows the government to break up monopolies, preventing any one capitalist from dominating the system. So those are two views. Is criminal justice even-handed is the question. So we continue researching critical criminology. Is criminal justice even-handed? In researching this issue, criminologists found that criminal members of powerless, disenfranchised groups are treated less favorable than the wealthy and the powerful, receiving stricter sentences, especially if that offender was single, young, urban, and male. Areas of high levels of economic disparity are also most likely to have a high number of people killed by the police. Where it is perceived that class conflict is creating the need for extreme forms of socially controlled police, they are more apt to act with more force. We've talked about racial bias being present in the justice system. Why? Talked about it, chapter 2. One of the theories is the racial threat hypothesis. As the number of minority group members in a community increases, law enforcement agents become more punitive. The racial threat hypothesis originated in 1967 by a researcher, Baylock, which argued as the relative size of racial and ethnic minority group increases, members of the majority group perceive it as a growing threat. Baylock contends that this perceived threat can take on two different forms. The first is economic threat. That is, an increased numbers of African Americans and minorities compete for jobs, housing, and other economic resources. Caucasians increasingly feel their economic well-being and dominance are threatened. The second is political threat, which occurs as African Americans and minorities enhance their political power, causing whites to feel their political dominance is threatened. Research have since extended and expanded Baylock's original propositions to include criminal threat. That is, a larger minority population fosters fear of crime. And in response to any form of minority threat, it is hypothesized that whites will demand intensified social control to maintain the dominant standing, i.e. police agents. That's the racial threat hypothesis. There are also alternative views of the critical theory. The other approaches to critical theory that criminologists are exploring. There are two types of realism, but there are significant differences. We can't talk about the left, which is in the book, without talking about the right. Right realism is associated with the right wing, neoliberal government. We're seeing a lot of this in our country right now. Right realists reject the idea that deeper structural or economic factors such as poverty are the causes of crime. They mainly hold that the individual is responsible for crime, although they do accept that high levels of social disorder and low levels of social control are associated with higher crime rates. Right realism tends to focus on the individual as being responsible for crime, arguing that we need to get tough on criminals to reduce crime, while our left realists, on the other hand, are more left-wing and argue that inequality is the main cause of crime and we need more community interventions to reduce crime. Left realism focuses on the causes of crime and deviance. They believe that living in a capitalistic society, a society where private entities control trade and industry instead of the state, is the main cause of crime. In a capitalistic society, there is cultural inclusion, meaning that everyone who lives within this society can pursue the ideas and concepts under capitalism. Essentially, they are consumers. However, most are economically excluded, meaning that they can't afford the things that others can to be relevant in a capitalistic society. Therefore, those who are economically excluded resort to crime and deviant behavior to fill the void left by not being able to buy all the crap that advertising tells them that we should buy. So it's kind of a difference between the two. The question, what is the relationship between left realism and terrorism? There's a passage in the book relative to that and will be part of this week's assignment. Both of these things are real and exist in our culture at the moment. Reasons for crime. There are three major reasons for people to commit crimes. Again, the primary consideration for the left realists are those individuals who are economically excluded. Usually this means poor or minorities. And there is relative desperation, subculture, and marginalization that are three factors that contribute to crime and deviance, according to the left realists. These three factors create the criminal triangle, the criminology triangle, and each factor works off another to create a criminal or deviant motivation. Book doesn't go into this in detail. They mention these words, but I'm going to expand a little bit. Relative deprivation. The rise of social media has made this factor the forefront runner for developing a criminal perspective. More people are exposed to advertising and consumerism, propaganda, and at the same time, they are continually exposed to how much they don't have and can acquire by seeing all the things everybody else does. This constant bombardment of attainable, unattainable is economic exclusion. Marginalization. Essentially, this is what happens when groups and demographics of people are left without no voice. Consider the Black Lives Matters movement. This was started because African Americans felt that they were not being treated as fairly as whites, and I generalize. Subculture. This is an acceptance of resorting to illegal means to attain desires. Theft, drug dealing, robbery all become a way of life in some of the communities that are suffering from economic exclusion. So it's a triangle. Starts with one, goes to the next, and then the next, starting with relative deprivation to marginalization, and then subculture. At the top, like I said, at the top of the triangle, relative deprivation, which creates a feeling of political marginalization. This in turn develops a subculture of like-minded individuals who accept criminality and deviant behavior as a way of life. And that is the idea behind left realism. Another view is the feminist view. The feminist views, the feminist movement has, from its origins, fought to help women break away from their traditional roles and gain economic, educational, and social advancement. As a result of the feminist movement, a number of views on female crime has emerged, including power control theory, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. The liberal feminism in the 1970s focused attention on social and economic role of women in society and its relationship to females in crime. This view suggested that the traditional lower crime rate for women could be explained by their second-class economic and social position. It was assumed that as women's social roles changed and their lifestyles became more like men's, their crime rates would converge. More women would be committing as much crime as men. While there were various explanations for the changing in female crime rates, there was two predominant explanations: the increased opportunities for women to participate in the labor force and thus the increased opportunities to commit certain types of crime, the changing self-concept and identity of women and girls due to the consciousness raising aspect of the movement. Freda Adler wrote a book, Sisters in Crime, that argued that as women continue to strive for equality with men, they will also have more opportunities to commit crimes that were previously unavailable to them due to occupational discrimination. As the position of women, she further said, as the position of women becomes similar to the position of men, this will result in women obtaining not only legitimate opportunities in the labor force, but illegitimate opportunities as well. And she also maintained that due to women's liberation, the violent crime rate among women would ultimately increase. Rita Simon wrote that a book, Women in Crime, and her position was only property crime rates among women would increase due to the women's liberation movement. The violent crime rates among women would decrease because women's frustrations would lessen as they are provided more opportunities in employment and education. And then came along the critical feminism theory. The critical feminist theorists attempt to explain the cause of crime, gender differences in crime rates, and the exploitation of female victims through a gendered lens. Critical feminists view gender inequality as stemming from the unequal power of men and women in a capitalist society, postmodern society, and the exploitation by fathers and husbands plays a role. Some of the important issues focused on by critical feminist criminologists include the masculinity in creating female victimization, the exploitation of women in the workforce, and the unequal treatment of men and women in the justice system. There was also a concern about the role of the media in demonizing girls and women in general, but more specifically of women of color. The origin of gender differences can be traced to the development of private property and male domination in the laws, which led male control over property and of power, and a patriarchal system developed in which men's work was valued and women's work was devalued. Women were treated as a commodity, responsible for the unpaid work, i.e. domestic work. The benefits were reaped for free and later on for cheap, continues still to be cheap. There's still a disparity with regards to the differences in pay for men and women. The patriarchal system sustains the female oppression at home and in the workplace. While on the decline, it still exists and is still supported by society. Critical feminists link criminal behavior patterns to the gender conflict created by economic and social structures common with the system. Because this system results in males controlling females both economically and biologically, this explains why females commit fewer crimes. They are also isolated by the family, and they have few opportunities to engage in criminal behavior. Research also suggests that in every culture, males try to emulate quote-unquote ideal masculine behaviors. This means being authoritative, in charge, combative, and controlling. Failure to adopt these roles leaves men feeling unmanly. Their struggles to dominate women in order to prove their manliness is called, quote unquote, doing gender. Crime is a vehicle for men to, quote unquote, do gender because it separates them from the weak and allows them to demonstrate physical bravery. Turning to violence towards women is an especially economical way to demonstrate manhood under the criminal feminist theory. Criminal feminists also focus on the social forces that shape women's lives and experiences to explain female delinquency and criminology. They attempt to show how sexual and other victimization of girls is a function of male socialization because as many young males learn to be aggressive and to exploit women, males seek out same-sex peer groups for social support. The groups encourage members to exploit and sexually abuse women. On college campuses, peer encourage sexual violence against women who are considered, quote, sluts. The label allows males to justify their actions. This attitude produces numerous incidences of sexual assault against young women, especially on campus. The other theory that stems from the critical feminist is the power control theory. John Hagen and his colleagues developed the power control theory, incorporating a conflict-oriented theory with social control theory that we learned a little while ago. The theory attempted to explain gender differences in crime rates by including family dynamics. Hagen's view is that crime rates are a function of two factors: class position, i.e. power, and family functions, i.e. control. The link between the two variables is that within the family, parents reproduce the power relationships they hold in the workplace. As a result, parents' work experiences and class position influence the criminality of their children. Specifically, Hagen argued youths from families characterized as patriarchal, i.e. the mother had lower status than the father, revealed greater gender differences in crime rates compared to youths, I should say delinquency rates compared to youths from a more egalitarian homes, i.e. parents had the same status or the mother was the only parent in the home. So patriarchal and the egalitarian, I have trouble with that one, don't I? Egalitarian families show the differences of controls placed on sons versus daughters, mainly in regard to maternal controls over their children. So, in the patriarchal families, mothers exert greater control over their daughters than they do their sons. Because sons are less controlled, they have more freedom to engage in risky behavior. In Hagen's earlier version of the power control theory, it is presumed that boys will be involved in more delinquency than girls for a number of reasons. First, the boys have fewer controls placed on them. Second, boys may view the act of risk-taking as pleasurable. And third, boys perceive fewer negative consequences in response to their behavior. In the other family form, mothers may exert either less control over daughters or more control over sons because mothers have a higher rank or an equal rank. According to Hagen, as mothers gain power relative to husbands, daughters gain freedom relative to sons. Through the egalitarian family structure, daughters are seen as more equal and can enter the workforce. Since less control is exerted on the daughter in such a family, they are given more room to engage in delinquent behavior, just as the sons are in the patriarchal family. But boys are actually still more likely to engage in risky behavior than girls, but the power control theory explains how that gap is lessening. So Hagen states that the fundamental premises of power control theory is that mothers relationally and instrumentally control their daughters more than sons, Instrumental controls involve basic supervision over the children. Relational controls involve the emotional bonds that ward off deviant behavior by the children. Instrumental and relational controls are exerted more by mothers than fathers in both of the family structures. Hagen says that relationship between gender and maternal relational controls is stronger in patriarchal families, and thus the relationship between mothers and daughters is intensified in these families. On the other hand, sons experience more relational control from their father. So these are some, I shouldn't say that, there are some criticism circulating this power control theory that I want to mention. Some of this criticism is based on the idea that the theories behind it haven't been assessed enough. Hagen's theory does not factor in other circumstances besides power balance in the household that might influence crime and delinquency, such as power and class in society as a whole. An example of this would be a single mother families in impoverished areas, right? Explains that the theory was only used to explain what they call common or minor delinquencies, not chronic criminal offenders. And lastly, they say that this theory, Hagen's theory, has not really been tested against any other major theories that we've already discussed. So it would be difficult to conclude whether the findings were legit. But it is part of the critical theory and explanation for causes on crime under a capitalistic functioning society. So that concludes this portion. There's one more. We have to talk about peacekeeping, and we're going to talk about restorative justice as a part of prevention under the critical theory.